radar.
Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Today I'm going to be continuing my coverage of War of the Visions' 3rd anniversary over on the Japanese side, and the collaboration with Final Fantasy VII Remake has been continuing on, and the second new character that is going to be joining the fray from that game is going to be none other than Yuffie from the Intergrade expansion. Now for me personally, Yuffie was never in my main Final Fantasy VII party. I always preferred the more seriously toned characters. She did grow on me though, and by the time that she made her appearances in the Kingdom Hearts series, I was definitely a fan by that point. And ninja jobs in Final Fantasy are definitely always up there, amongst some of my favorites. I did actually prefer the remake version of Yuffie over the original. I think it was actually a nice improvement, and I did actually enjoy the Intergrade expansion quite a bit. Now that said, Yuffie will be joining us here in War of the Visions as the latest and greatest evasive ninja unit, but does she actually have what it takes to kind of stand on her own and separate herself from Sephiroth's shadow? Or will she actually be playing second fiddle? Well, let's dive into her kit and find out. So Yuffie will be joining us here in War of the Visions as a 90 cost fire unit. She has a base 4-2 movement, and she can wear hats and cloth. Her TMR is her headband, and this is actually a self-only buff that will provide a flat 20 AP restore, as well as a 20% luck buff for 3 turns, and it does come with 2 casts. This is a pretty nice TMR, maybe an alternative to Final Fantasy VI Locke's TMR, which actually did give that luck and agility all in one. As a single pure evade buff, I do think that one is still better, and it is actually a party buff as well, which is definitely an advantage. This one though is an accessory, which kind of gives it a little bit more flexibility, and Yuffie does have an agility buff kind of innately in her kit, so she wouldn't be missing that one. Overall in the game too, there is really no shortage of party agility buffs. It seems like that is really coming pretty common lately on a lot of newer units. Now moving down into Yuffie's stats, and we're starting off here with the below average HP mark for both base and innate. Her attack though is decent enough, she's just squeaking over that above average mark there. The rest of the stat line here though is really top notch, and that's going to start with her dexterity. While it's not on a gunner tier, 263 innate is probably about as good as you can get, outside of those ranged units. The agility and luck values, though, are amongst the best in the game. 281 luck is good for 5th overall in the game upon her release, while her 72 innate agility ties her for 1st with several other units. And those raw stats, do translate directly into her accuracy and evade levels, as well as her crit and crit evasion, which all are at above average level. Now, of particular note here is that innate evade total, and including passives, that is going to be at an 81% level, and that will tie her with Violet currently for 10th overall in the game. Now for her mastery, we are looking at a 15% slash resist penetration, always welcome on any slash unit, so I do like that. And she does come in with a flat 5 evasion bonus, which I did factor into that 81% total that we were just looking at. So kind of an average mastery here, nothing spectacular, but not bad by any means either. On the defensive front, as expected for a more evasive unit, she's coming in with 0 defense and 0 spirit. On the resistance fronts, we are looking at a 10% to slash and pierce, as well as a 15% to missile. Now notably here, Yuffie is carrying a 10% weakness to magic, so that one is of particular concern for her, especially when you are backing it up with that subpar hit point total and that 0 spirit as well. And to that point, assuming a mage is able to hit her, she will go down very easily. To be honest though, with a sub 3200 HP, a lot of damage dealers, of pretty much any damage, are really going to have her in one punch range. In terms of her ailment resist, she is coming in innately with Confuse, Blind, and then a lesser resist on Sleep. Not ideal here, generally on evasive units, I would prefer stuff like Stop, Charm, or Disable, particularly for manual play in those instances. But Sleep is actually pretty useful. That one is one of those ailments that does reduce your evade to 0 when it does trigger on you, so definitely nice to have at least some resistance to that. Now for dream enhancements, Yuffie is going to carry that designation of a physical evasion unit. So as you can see here, she is coming in pretty light on the HP bonus, and Even the attack value is kind of lesser than we saw with Sephiroth just last week, who had 180 bonus there. She is making up for that though in terms of the evasive stats. She does have an enhanced 45 luck, as well as 20 evasion here available at the max potential. Of course, reaching that ceiling is going to be very difficult to say the least, but if you are able to get there, that would represent approximately 36% additional evade percentage that she can pick up, which is very significant. Now, for just awakening her into the system, she is going to pick up that additional Dream Mastery. And here she gets what I would say is a pretty modest upgrade, to say the least. She is going to get 15 initial AP, 15 crit damage, and these first two effects here, I do like that initial AP for kind of blitz or dive strategies, where you might be able to kind of quickly get in on the enemy, before they are fully ready. And that is going to give her some additional AP in the bank so that, she can string off several attacks there. And I would say that Yuffie here with her enhanced mobility is definitely a good candidate for that kind of strategy. Now, in addition to those, her Job 25 ability is picking up an upgrade. And this one is kind of, it's kind of whatever. Her Job 25 ability in its base form does have a 40% attack buff that it bestows after the damage is calculated. And after this upgrade, that actually gets moved so that it's a pre-damage buff. So really at that point, it's kind of a minor impact, on your damage there. It's kind of an underwhelming mastery here, I would say. All right, moving into the passives and counters here next. And I don't think there really is a lot of ways that you can build Yuffie. She's going to be squarely in that evade realm, and at that point it's really just going to be different flavors of that evade and kind of which options that you want to pair with that. And for a general build for Yuffie, I'd probably most often use passive number 1 here for that attack and defense penetration, as well as passive number 4 for the increased evasion and acquired AP. Now, one thing to note here is that her defense penetration is conditional, and it is conditional on her being above 80% HP. So again, as we sort of alluded to earlier, Yuffie is going to be very one-shottable for quite a few damage dealers out there, so I'm actually okay with this kind of condition on it because it is coming with an enhanced 60% defense penetration, which is very, very high. The evasion here is really her only path for real survivability, so I think if you're using this unit for PvP, you're definitely going to want to maximize that evasion as much as possible. She does have that HP passive. I'm not sure how worth it that one is, just considering the weak base HP total that she carries. Now, a second build option for her might be more of a mobile build, kind of utilizing that increased mobility that she has there on passive number 2. Of course, to use that one, you would need to give up either the evasion or the defense penetration. And I think that I would potentially look at giving up that defense penetration passive if I was able to offset that maybe with utilizing the new Dark Ifrit vision card that we will look at a little bit later. Now, you could also opt to drop that evasion there. I'd say at that point, it kind of all just depends on the teams that you're going up against, how innately accurate they are, and if you actually feel comfortable in kind of losing that headroom there. Now, why would I actually run this more mobile build here? Yuffie does have that 4 base movement. Why would I actually think about putting her up to a 5 movement? Well, one would actually be for manual play. Having access to 5 movement with the potential to even get up to 6 innately is a really big deal in terms of closing the gap on an enemy, especially range units, which are very popular in manual PvP. In terms of autoplay on certain maps, if you set it up correctly, it can actually be very strong there as well. Yuffie, with her very high agility, chances are, she's going to be moving first in the battle. She could have a turn to buff up and then dive right in on the enemy and immediately start drawing the attacks of the enemy and potentially even put them into an AP deprivation state. Now, that does have the side benefit that they're not able to actually buff up beforehand and put on things like barriers or courage or re-raise or even something like hate on a tank. Of course, it is kind of a niche application and definitely map dependent and definitely takes some fine tuning for sure to get it right. But in my view, I think that is what evade is, in the current state of the game, especially in the upper echelons of PvP, where most everyone at this point is very well accustomed to dealing with very high evade units. In terms of counters, she does have 2 which are pretty decent. The one that's coming from her new main job, and the one that actually is coming from her operative sub-job. I think that in most cases I would actually run her new one just because it really kind of lends itself well to what she's trying to do as an evasion unit. And it does have a 100% chance of going off with 2 conditions. One is that you're not blocked by something like reaction block, and the other is that you actually have to evade the attack in order for it to actually proc. But when it does trigger, it is going to add 15 CT into her bar, and if multiple units are actually attacking her, she can actually rack up quite a bit of CT there. So I do like this counter. It is definitely going to help get her turns up quicker if you're able to manage it properly, and maybe actually help her chain off on an enemy in that case. Alright, let's move into Yuffie's all-new main job here next, and her self buff is going to give her 1 Mirage stack. Again, this is technically a barrier, so it can be broken immediately by barrier breaks or even by multi-hit attacks. Now, in addition to that, she is getting a 30% increased typed evasion towards pierce damage, so could be very useful in the Flag Bearer Glaciella matchup. She is definitely one of the most accurate units in the game. Now, the key part of this skill is that it does come with an all-new mechanic for War of the Visions, and it's actually something that has generated a little bit of hype, a little bit of anticipation for this unit. And while this ability is active, she will have the ability to ignore completely 100% guaranteed hits. And how this works is that it doesn't negate the attacks completely. It will actually check the accuracy level of the unit and see if the unit can actually hit you in that case. So I do think this skill is pretty cool. It kind of gives her a little bit extra insurance against those units which do rely heavily on those 100% hits, which there are quite a few out there. And I do think it is a skill that kind of lends itself very well to that gameplay method of kind of blitzing in very quickly on the enemy that we were just talking about, where she can kind of be that immediate disruptor, and she wouldn't actually in that case even need to worry about taking those 100% hits, if she had used this buff before she went in. All right, her next one here is going to be a party buff, and this one is going to give 25% agility to her allies, as well as a buff to herself for 15 unit resist. So this one is decent enough. Obviously, agility is always nice to have on any evasive unit. Remember though that in autoplay, that mobility that we talked about can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. If you were using this buff on turn 1, a Yuffie might then be in a position where she could hit the enemy on her turn 2 and not be able to get that first buff online that we were just talking about. So definitely something that you need to be aware of with a unit like this, and making sure that you are getting, your buff rotation down correctly when it comes to autoplay. Alright, moving into her attacks here next, and her low AP skill is going to be a super basic one. It's a range 4 with a range height of 1. It's a single target attack, and it does have that low 121% mod. No additional effects on this skill at all, which is always a negative for me. The skill though does have a purpose though, and that is that it is non-elemental. So if you happen to run in an opponent that has stacked up their fire resist very high, this is something that she can fall back on to at least do, a little bit of damage in that case. Alright, attack 2 is up here next, and this one is going to be a burst style AoE emanating out from Yuffie. This is a skill that she actually really likes to use in auto, and that's because this is her highest mod here at 205%. On top of that though, it is actually her only area of effect option here in the main kit as well. Now this skill does come along with 2 effects, 40% slash res penetration. Unfortunately, that is not a 3-turn buff, it is only just for this particular skill. Now in addition to that, it does have an enhanced 40% chance to blind her opponents with this one. So I would definitely consider running Yuffie at 97 Faith just to maximize the potential of this skill. It does have a direct impact on her survivability, if you were able to get the blind off on an opponent. The trade-off there, of course, is that she is more susceptible to ailments herself, and she would incur additional magic damage. In her case, I'm not super worried about that magic damage. I think if somebody hits her with a spell, she's definitely going to be dead anyway. Now, do note here as well that this is the stronger version of Blind in the game at that 80% potency, and it does directly reduce an opponent's accuracy by a full 80%. And at that point, if you do land this, they're not going to have any chance of hitting Yuffie whatsoever. I will say though that there is some risk in Yuffie using this skill, and it has to do all with the positioning. This is going to be a skill that she's going to want to get right in the middle of the enemies and kind of get this one off. And at that point, assuming that the enemy survives and they haven't been blinded, that's going to give them access to Yuffie's side or potentially even her back as well. And as we know, that will give them an increased accuracy of 15% from the side, or even worse, 30% from the back. So I do think that is definitely another reason why you want to pump up her faith and really maximize your chance here to land that blind, just to kind of keep her safe, even from the back. 50% reduced accuracy at that point is still very strong. Now, one other sort of concern I do have with this skill is something that we've actually looked at in my last couple of videos, and that's that Odin, which is one of the most popular PvP espers, does come with a 25% chance to resist blind, which, at that point, does actually make it fairly easy to completely negate the blind portion of this attack. So I definitely think this skill, in some situations is definitely playing with fire a little bit here for Yuffie. Alright, skill number 3 is a range 3 with a range height of 1, and it is a 200% typeless attack. So what that means is that this one is not checked against the damage resistance of the opponent. It's only going to be checked against 3 things in this case. That's going to be your single target resistance, your fire resistance, and your defense. This one does have some nice utility on it as well, baked into it. It will dispel protect before that damage comes in, so kind of gives her a nice way to deal with that if the unit has buffed that one on. All right, skill number 4 is going to be a range 3 with a range height of 1. Again, this is a 200% mod, and this one has 2 effects coming in prior to the damage. It is going to move Yuffie to the panel right in front of the enemy. Again, not in love with that because it does make it very easy for the enemy to get to her side or her back. The second effect is that 40% attack buff that we spoke about a little bit earlier, and this one is a 3-hit chaining attack as well. And since this attack is actually less AP than skill number 3, she will actually prefer using it over that one in most scenarios. Unless, of course, the target does have that protect status on, or they have built up their slash resistance very high. I do consider that this skill here is an immense guild raid skill, not only because it is a 3-hitter with a 200% mod, but because it is giving her that 40% attack buff in there as well, which for optimized guild raid play is very nice. We're not stopping to buff ourselves up in that score attack mode. Now again, as we talked about, if you only have Yuffie at level 120, remember that that buff will come in post damage in that case. Now, next one up is going to be her Limit Burst. It is a range 4 with a range height of 1. And again, this one is a 3-hit attack. And this one pre-damage will buff up her defense penetration by 40, and it will also buff her agility by 30% for 3 turns. So big agility buff here. That's actually going to net her, roughly 19 agility. Obviously, that's just going to speed her turns up, which is always nice. But it's actually going to buff her evade value as well. It's going to actually get her about 10 to 11 points of evasiveness there. She will actually look to lead off most fights with this one. It is her longest range, hardest hitting skill. Now this defense penetration buff here, I think, is what actually gives the potential for you to maybe drop that passive that we were looking at, just a moment ago. At that point though, it does maybe put her in a position where she's more of a one-fight pony, but, depending on the application you're using for, that may be just fine. So overall here, a potential drawback for Yuffie is range height. You'll notice that none of the skills here go above a range height of 1, though her strong mobility that she have, can definitely help mitigate that issue. All right, Subjobs are up here next, and for her main subjob, she is picking up a mug skill here, very much a flavor skill and a nod back to Final Fantasy VII. Probably not all that useful in PvP, but it is very nice for guild farming. Skill number 2 is going to be a range 2 with a cross AoE, getting it up to a range of 3. It's a 165 mod with a 25% chance to confuse the targets. Now running High Faith, you might have a decent chance of landing this, especially on mage type units. The main problem I would say is that, she's generally going to prefer that burst AoE that we looked at in the main kit, just because that is a higher mod on that one. So in auto play, she's definitely going to prefer that one. For manual play though, I think that this one could be very, very useful. Now Yuffie does get operative as a sub job as well. It's another evasive job, and it's the same job actually that Sweetheart Ildira has as her main one. And it does have some nice evade support here with both an evade buff as well as a evade centric debuff, which will debuff the target's accuracy from a fairly long range. But the highlight really for her here is going to be this Blinding Trinity skill. It is another 3-hit attack, and this one is an area of effect one. Now Ildira does have the same skills, so I think this one is actually a really good one to use so that they can chain up together potentially on multiple targets. Now as we saw, in the main kit, area of effect damage was a little lacking there, so definitely always nice to have another option there as well. Now her other sub job here is going to be Dragoon, and Dragoon I think actually did get a pretty decent job enhancement that we'll see here in global, relatively soon. Dragon's Kin is going to give her protect effect, as well as the chance to completely ignore counters while that protect effect is active, which is a very, very nice buff. Of course, Dragon Standard is a way that she can actually buff up her mobility potential up to 6 if she is using that mobility passive. And then the Dragon's Dive skill is another very nice one. It got an enhancement to actually drop the healing power of the targets by up to 70, and then it does become a block style AoE, so very nice to actually hit multiple targets with that one. Now pierce damage is definitely a weakness for quite a few units in the game, so could be a reason that you might look at using this one. I think that the main application here for this job though is definitely going to be manual PvP, which Yuffie with her top tier mobility and very nice evasiveness, I can see her being a very good unit in that particular mode. Alright guys, on to future considerations next, and we actually have 2 different vision cards and 2 pieces of equipment to get through, so I'm going to try to blast through these as quickly as possible. And first up is going to be Yuffie's card, and it is a job-based card. Ninjas, operatives, and duelists are notably all covered, as jobs that can use this one. It does have several sword and staff-based jobs in there as well, so it does actually cover the majority of units who you would actually want to benefit from a card like this. Sadly though, samurais are not on that list, none of the dagger-based evaders either, and even some of the unique evade-based jobs are left out, such as 2B and Tifa. Now looking at the base stats of the card here, I always like having luck in the base stats there. Very helpful for stacking up your evade total. The bestowed ability here is going to have some unit resistance and attack values, so that's pretty good too. Quite a few guaranteed hits in the game are actually single target based. Now in terms of the party effect, the main thing that you're going to be looking at here is that 20 evasion, but the other effects are actually quite nice too. You have 60% acquired AP and a 20% crit damage. So all around, this card really just blows away the Shiva Vision card. Shiva, of course, is a magic-based card, so depending on the party, it hasn't always been optimal to use for that particular reason. So that one can now go to your second slot or potentially not even be used at all, depending on your party and what other cards you have access to. So really nice card here. Even better because at least on the JP side, this card was completely free. It's a free get, and then from the event, you were actually able to grind out the shards as well. So I do think that's quite amazing. This is a UR quality card and a very nice one at that. So I do hope that we continue to see that to kind of get us into this job-based meta a little bit quicker. All right, the next card up here is definitely not a free one, and this one is the latest entry in the Dark Esper Dual Element series. And this one is going to be Dark Ifrit, and it is going to be effective on both fire and lightning units. Now, as with all Dark Esper cards, the base stats kind of speak for themselves here. Definitely not an evade card, in terms of the effects that it has to the party. The base stats, though, are another story. You can see there 25 luck and 4 agility. That's about as good as it gets for any vision card in the game in terms of kind of buffing up your evade. So I think if you were using this maybe as an offensive card, in an evade party, it definitely has some value there in kind of stacking up those particular stats and making that unit even more evasive. Now 10% area resistance here on the bestowed is super nice as well, especially when it comes to the fire and lightning elements. A number of units in those elements actually do have a very strong innate area resistance to build off of. Now the party effects here are going to be 25 defense pen as well as 26 slash attack. So we did see this on Snow's vision card as well with that defense penetration. So now we're going to have fire and lightning with access to that particular effect as well. So similar to Dark Ramu before it, this card is definitely more offensive focused. And it's going to really depend on the party and, what other VCs are in play, whether you do have room to fit this one in as kind of a primary card. Now, in the case of Fire Evade, they do have a potential spot open, just because of Sorrow's vision card. And I will actually showcase that in the mock build here shortly. Now, another note here is that obviously there is an Esper that does come along with this card. Very strong Esper for slash evade units. And really, it is pretty close to Dark Odin, in terms of how good it is. And even better, for a fire evade unit. It does actually have some unique nodes on its tree as well. It is the first Esper that has access to reaction block on its skill tree. So that is actually pretty interesting and kind of a way for you to get to a point where you can completely ignore counters innately. Now, if you're not investing into Fire Evade, I think that this guy is probably a skippable one, maybe just hope for an off banner in the future. And to be honest, for most people, I think that it may be pretty skippable as well, even if you are going for Fire Evade. I think though that for people who are really trying to maximize that playstyle and really try to min-max it, you're definitely going to want this Esper, if not the vision card here as well. All right, so there is a new weapon coming in for Yuffie, and it is actually a pretty nice one. This one is her 4-point shuriken. It only has one version in the game, and it is going to be a crit based one. I'm not actually 100% sure how this item gets acquired, but I think it's actually going to be a bingo board, similar to what we saw with Hope. Very nice stats here on this item there. You can see that 179 base attack and a solid 22 crit value there in the base stats. It does come along with 4 passives for Yuffie as well. 15 slash attack, 15 crit damage, and 20 slash resist penetration. So this is definitely going to amp up her offensive potential. She's going to get 4 very, very nice offensive passives here right off the bat. Now, Yuffie can actually use ninja blades as well, so there might be a time and place for her to use, Sasuke's katana, +6, potentially if you were looking for even more initial AP. Otherwise, I don't really ever see this item coming off of her. Now, as part of the Trials of Reckoning event that will come along with the Final Fantasy collaboration, Yuffie's Moogle Hood will be the other piece of available equipment. And believe it or not, I actually think this one will be better for Sephiroth here than Yuffie. And I am highlighting the shield version here for that reason. And if I could actually only make one of these, I would make this shield one. Though I think, if you are able to farm up enough resources from the trial, definitely make an evade version potentially for Yuffie there as well. Now the shield version here does come with an 18 defense and 378 HP, which, that's decent enough for a cloth piece. It does have 15 crit evade there in the base stats, which is also notable. The unconditional passives on this are going to be 30% acquired AP and 20 crit evade. So we have a total of 35 crit evade on the piece here, which is pretty substantial. For a general equipment, amongst all your units, I think that this is a decent enough piece, but really nothing all that special. The conditional passives, though, for Seph and Yuffie, I think are really what makes this item shine. And they're going to get a 10 area resist as well as a 5% all element resistance. And that second one in particular does synergize really, really well with Sephiroth and that passive that he has for the 20% Omni resistance. So I think you add these two mitigation passives along with that crit evade, and this is just a super nice defensive piece for Sephiroth. So if you are going for him, 100% grab this item and build it up for him. Now for Yuffie specifically, like I said, I think it is just a little bit less compelling, just because the evade available on the dodge version just really isn't able to compete with items like Winter's Clothes or Black Garb. All right, guys, flashing over to our timeline, and it's going to be identical to the one that we just looked at in my Sephiroth video. So I'm not going to completely rehash this one here today. Yuffie did release the week following Sephiroth on the Japanese side. It kind of remains to be seen if they will condense those banners and global like they've kind of tended to do on several of them here for us in the past. I would say that it might be a little much at that point, considering we do have Amnelis coming the same week as Sephiroth. So if that's the case, we would be expecting Yuffie to come, that final Wednesday there of March. Now, if you are interested in picking up Yuffie, at a minimum, I'm going to recommend that you pick up Sorrow's Vision card from the Dragon Quest collaboration, which we do expect to see here in Global, sometime within the next month. Now, whether you grab Sorrow as well, I don't think it's 100% necessary, but they do actually work very well together, and he is also a very strong evade unit in his own right. I did do a full preview on him, and I will put a link to that one above if you haven't checked it out before. Now, of obvious concern here for Yuffie is Perrine and Amnelis, both of whom are pretty powerful 100 cost water units. I do think that really puts a damper on things for fire. Perrine in particular does have a nice guaranteed hit ability, and she is very bulky, especially against fire units. Yuffie's concern, though, is not only going to be these water units, but just the other highly accurate units that are coming in, in or around her release as well. We did have Lisal coming in for the wind element just after Yuffie, a very, very accurate unit, as well as Rurugia, which did release, a few weeks before her, which, again, another very, very highly accurate unit, among some of the best in the game. Of course, that is not even mentioning Sephiroth, who we did just look at in my last video. Not only can he be built for high accuracy, as we did there, but the fact is that he doesn't really even need that because he does have so many guaranteed hits available to him innately in his kit. So I do believe these factors here are going to be more than enough to be able to hold this fire evade team in check. And I think it's definitely going to continue to keep evade kind of where it is known as today, more of a niche playstyle, or maybe something that you break out as a surprise, kind of in a blind setup situation. All right, guys, so here is a mock build that I've put together for Yuffie. And of course, this one is going to be an evade build. And this one I thought it would actually be fun to use King Mont here in this build just to see how evasive I could make him as well. And believe it or not, he can actually get pretty far up there. And if Yuffie or Eldyra are able to land any of their blind effects, that is going to be even better for him. Now you could of course look to Sorrow there as well. He's going to fit right in with the other two evaders, and he is a pretty good 90 cost. Personally, I'm just a little bit down on the DQ collab in general, just because we have no idea at this point how they're going to do the treatment for dream enhancements for these collaboration units, which, at this point is anybody's guess, when those are going to happen for Dragon Quest in particular. And the potential is here, as we've seen with some other collaborations in the past, that, these units are just kind of going to eventually get into a state where they're unusable, within the current meta of the game, when more and more units are being used at level 140 and they don't have that access at that point. In terms of this particular composition, though, I do like the idea of Yuffie kind of getting out front and maybe commanding a hit or two at the beginning of the battle, and especially while she has that sure hit avoidance and barrier online. And then the attention will be diverted to King Mont as he kind of trails in behind. I do have him wearing the Keenblade TMR in this to potentially maybe even get off some additional CT there for the party. Now, King Mont is one of the early units who does have access to the Dream Enhancement system, and I think he actually did get a pretty nice upgrade, so I think we are going to be seeing more of him, in the game when that does come along. He does still have a couple of nice skills in his kit. His Limit Burst is still very dangerous, and that Slash Imperil that he brings, would be very nice for amping up the damage of both Yuffie and Ildira. And really what I think makes this composition work is going to be Ildira's Limit Burst. I think that is really the star of the show when it comes to any fire evade comp. And that is really just going to allow you to knock the CT down of the enemy and start potentially building up some big chains on them and really taking them out very quickly. So in the builds, of course I'm going to use her Shuriken weapon. And I'm going to be pairing that here with some high evade pieces in the Black Garb +6, as well as Katone's TMR here for that 5 agility and 12 evade that it has in the base stats. Now, Lucia's TMR could be another good option there as well. I just have it on Ildira already in the build. Now, keep in mind, guys, that this is an all-out evade build here. I'm really trying to get that up as high as I can and really trying to push the limits of where I can get there. Now, there is a couple of things I could probably do here to maybe get the percentage points, a couple ticks higher, but, this is really reaching the limits of what evade can do, in the game today. And in my view, when it comes to evasion, it really is an all or nothing type build. I don't think there really is any middle or partial ground when it comes to evade. If you're going for it, you want to go all in and really get that up as high as you possibly can. Now for an Esper here, I am highlighting Dark Ifrit. If you weren't actually able to grab him, you could always go for the classic evade Espers, Chimera, Dark Odin, or Tetrasylphid. For the primary VCs here in the build, I am using Yuffie's Vision card for that evasion, Dark Ifrit for a little bit of offensive punch, but also just to up Mont's evade here just a bit. And then of course I am using Sorrow's Vision card there on Ildira, and that's going to give us that agility and luck value. Of these three, Dark Ifrit is definitely the optional one. If you have Dark Tetrasylphid, I think that would work, pretty much just as well. Now looking at the secondary slots here in the build, I'm going to have the classic Rainbow Evade Trio. We're going to have House Baal for the agility, Shiva for that evade, and then of course Secrets of the Heart for that additional luck value. Moving down now into the Trust Stones, on the left side first stone, I'm using agility debuff resistance and crit evasion, and on the third stone I have that attack and elemental debuff resistance. These I think are just two combinations that I have come to like on evade units, just from a survivability angle. I do want to avoid my agility being broken, as that is going to directly lower my evade potential. And if I do end up taking a hit, I want to try to dampen that damage as much as possible. Crit evasion is one way that helps you do that. Likewise, those debuff resistances, they have the potential to save me from a one-shot, just by having that 25% chance to block an imperil that may be tied into a very potent attack. Now, HP and luck are going to round out the set there. I use them in almost every build. And this is all going to get baked into an evade set for the 15 passive evade bonus that provides. Now you could also opt for a luck set there. It's just going to be a little bit less, when it comes to potential evasion. Now on the right side, my first stone is going to be that standard utility stone with the acquired AP and dexterity. Then we're going to have that attack and fire attack. And finally, since we have so much covered on Yuffie's weapon, I'm just kind of filling in some missing passives here with that accuracy and reaction block percentage. Now I did actually like pairing that reaction block with Dark Ifrit, since again that is going to actually give us a 55% total chance to ignore counter abilities. So all of these passives here are going to get tied into an agility set for the 6 additional total agility, as well as the 5 passive evade that we'll pick up there. Now one other important note when it comes to Trust Stones here, especially for an evade build, it is very, very important that you temper the stones for your J stone to get the maximum evade there, which is 8. But also your P stone, which has 19 potential luck on it. Make sure that you're getting the maximum values there to really min-max your evade here. Alright, so summing up everything here, you can see there in the stats, this is going to put us here at a pretty impressive 334% total evade rate. And keep in mind that this is calculated based on her 120 level stats. We did look at those dream enhancements earlier, which do have the potential, at maximum to get her another 36 evade there as well. So she is not going to be easy to hit by any means, especially when you start factoring in some of the in-game buffs that she has, especially that 30% agility buff on her Limit Burst. Even some of the more highly accurate units in the game, they are really going to need to dedicate their entire build into accuracy, in order to hit a unit like this. Now, another nice thing here you can see in the stats is she is completely ignoring defense in this particular build. assuming that she has not taken a hit and gone below that 80% HP threshold. Now, as always, if you are interested in taking a closer look here at the builds, I will go ahead and drop a link to it in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Yuffie? This is going to be a top tier evade unit. She's both extremely agile and mobile, and she's adding to that an all new self buff, which does actually allow her to completely ignore sure hits for the first 3 turns in battle, which definitely will help keep her alive there early on in the fight. And that's going to be all in addition to that 1-stack Mirage Barrier that she has as well. Now, her enhanced chance to blind is another highlight for her. And, you know, if she is able to land that one, that's definitely going to amp up her survivability indirectly as well. She's going to be no slouch when it comes to damage either. She has access to very high penetration values, large damage modifiers, and AoE chaining potential, which will definitely help her out in both PvP and PvE alike. Now, on the other hand, you know, what that guaranteed hit avoidance cannot stop is very highly accurate units, who once Yuffie's one-hit barrier is destroyed or dispelled, will be able to tee off and kill this unit very, very easily. As we looked at in the base stats, you know, this is definitely among the more squishy units in the game. She's completely lacking when it comes to her defense and spirit, and she comes in with a below average HP total on top of that. Now, Yuffie is also lacking, you know, just a bit when it comes to what she offers to the team in terms of utility. She doesn't have a lot to offer, you know, in terms of team buffs. The majority of her buffs are actually very, you know, self-centric. On top of that, she isn't really offering all that much in terms of active utility. She's not bringing any sort of breaks or imperils to kind of amp up the team's damage there. At the end of the day, though, you know, Yuffie is going to give Fire a high-end evade composition that is going to be right there with some of the best that we've seen in the game to date. You know, right there next to Earth and Light. But, you know, is that really what Fire needs at this point to be competitive, you know, at the high end of the game? In terms of PvP, at least, you know, in my view, Evade is a very niche playstyle that has the potential to be good, you know, in the right situations. Whether that potential can be realized, though, is really all about opportunity and the other units that are filtering out into the meta, how innately accurate they are or how good their 100% hit skills are. So that is definitely something to consider with a unit like this and how much potential mileage or usage you're going to get out of them, you know, with the other units that are sort of released in or around them. Yuffie, though, thankfully, you know, she does bring some other things to the table. In particular, guild raids, you know, she is going to be very welcome on that Fire team going forward. So final thoughts here today, guys. Do I think Evade is completely invalidated and negated in the current state of the game? I would say no. You know, it still definitely has that potential that it's always had to completely expose, you know, less accurate teams, or even catch some more accurate units off guard if they haven't built or spec'd into it specifically. In the upper echelons of PvP, however, you know, those windows of opportunity that you have, I would say, are getting slimmer and slimmer by the day with every new highly accurate unit that they release. And because of this, you know, I do think that Gumi has suffocated this unit just a bit before it has really had a chance to shine or stand on its own in the game, especially in global, where we're going to be even more well prepared for it, and to be honest, have been for some time, you know, just because of the long reign of Elena. And I do think it is kind of sad that they've effectively managed to diminish this recent buildup of the fire element so quickly, already considered one of the weakest in the game, specifically because they've decided to release several new highly accurate 100 cost units into the game in or around the same time as Yuffie here, not to mention a couple of new highly powerful water units as well. So while her ability to ignore sure hits is very unique and powerful, it does absolutely nothing for her against those types of highly accurate units. And Yuffie, as we talked about, is someone who will get one shot very easily with little to no survivability to fall back on after her Mirage is broken. So for those reasons, you know, I am just a bit disappointed with the game designers here, as we do have this new set of fire units that will take a tremendous amount of investment to kind of get online and deploy, but will be sort of immediately relegated to niche PvP status. And for that reason, I do think that she will be a little bit lost in the 3rd anniversary shuffle, which is kind of a shame because, you know, I really think that this is a fun unit and one that I'm really interested in pulling for. But it seems that Gumi, you know, they kind of have this lane for 90 cost units, and this is kind of where they want them to reside, is maybe more of a niche or roleplay type situation. In terms of fire ever really being a powerhouse premier element, I don't think that time is going to be now here with Yuffie. Honestly, I don't really see it getting there until some true 100 cost power is infused in the element that maybe brings some significant new abilities. But hey, you know, we don't know what's going to happen here. You know, maybe Shadow Lynx will be a fire unit and completely change that outlook. I guess we'll see soon enough. That is all kind of big picture stuff though, and sorry for the rambling there on kind of the meta implications. It's definitely not all doom and gloom for me. I do see kind of the saving grace of this fire evade comp as really kind of that disruptive dive kind of playstyle that we were discussing. Of course, Eldira's Limit Burst, as we discussed, it is really going to be the key to unlock that team and really get those big chains off and take enemies down quickly. For those same reasons, I do think that combo of Yuffie and Eldira is going to be very strong in the manual arena as well. So I would say that is the good and the silver lining for this unit. She does have that going for her, on top of being that phenomenal PvE chainer. Of course, for a number of you out there, I'm sure this unit maybe is a personal favorite as well. And that, my friends, always deserves a pull. So those are my thoughts today, but I want to know, what are you thinking? Am I off base on this one, or am I being a little too hard on this unit? It's not that I think that she's bad, on the contrary, I actually think that she's a very nice evade unit. It's just more that my current viewpoint on evade has soured just a little bit due to what I feel has been just a little bit of an overcorrection by Gumi with the level of raw accuracy that they've handed out to many of the latest units, including those that we talked about kind of right around Yuffie's release. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'd really love to hear about it. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.